Go right ahead.
All right. Good morning, everyone. This is Dan McKiernan. I'm the director of the Division of Marine Fisheries. We have a number of commission members as well and staff, and we're going to hold a virtual public hearing for the next 30 minutes prior to the business meeting of the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission, which is scheduled to begin at 8:30 today. Today's topics have to do with the recreational regulations concerning Georges Bank cod, Gulf of Maine cod, and haddock. I believe there's also a well, those are the two for this morning. Under the provisions of General Law 30A and the authorities of the DMF under Chapter 130, 17A, and 104, we're holding this public hearing on the emergency regulations. Emergency regulations are put into effect when we are unable to follow or allow the normal rulemaking process, which normally takes 4 to 6 months for regulation to be fully promulgated. But there is authority in state law to allow the director, with the approval of the commission, to enact a public hearing and to enact an emergency regulation without a public hearing and then follow up with a public hearing after. And that's why we're here this morning, because these rules need to be enacted as permanent. Go ahead, Jared. I think a lot of you who've attended our virtual meetings have seen this slide before, but we are seeking your input on these issues today. We want you to, if you have any questions or comments, direct them directly to us. Everyone is muted through the presentation. The meeting moderator will recognize you when you raise your hand, and we will first go through the presentation. We will take clarifying questions, and then we'll take comments. We don't enable the chat function because we find that there's often debates that go back and forth outside of the presentation, and it can be very distracting. This public hearing will be part of the permanent record and will reside on our YouTube channel. Jared, do you want to go through the specifics?
Sure. So I'll run through each of the three proposals, and then we can take questions and comments on them. I just assume go through the proposals first and then take comments rather than doing them each individually. So the first is recreational Gulf of Maine cod. The council set a sub ACL for the stock of approximately 423,000 pounds for the recreational fishery, and through the council process, NOAA Fisheries established the proposed limits for the season, which is a September 1 through October 7th open fishing season and April 1 through April 14 open fishing season, with a 1 fish per angler bag limit at 22-inch minimum size. This provides about 4 additional weeks of recreational fishing, and to balance that out against the sub ACL, a 1-inch increase in the minimum size. NOAA Fisheries implemented these rules on August 31. We followed suit with emergency regulations, and now we're seeking to finalize these rules for the remainder of this fishing year, which will end on April 30th, 2023. Or should NOAA Fisheries keep these rules for the following fishing year, we would maintain these on the record as well. Next is Gulf of Maine haddock. There's a 8 million pound sub ACL for this stock for the recreational fishery. Through the council process, NOAA Fisheries implemented a 20 fish per angler bag limit. That's a 5 fish increase from the prior fishing year. The open fishing season remains the same, which is open year round with the exception of March, and the minimum size remains the same at 17 inches. So the 5 fish bag limit was implemented by NOAA Fisheries on August 31, and we are now moving to where we adopted that by emergency regulation and now trying to adopt that as a final regulation. Now the next stock is Gulf of Maine recreational George's Bank cod. The recreational George's Bank cod, there was a 50% reduction in the sub ACL from about 300,000 pounds to about 163,000 pounds. This reduction in the sub ACL was driven by an overall decline in the George's Bank resource through the council process, or framework 63. NOAA Fisheries approved an open season of August 1 through April 30th with a slot limit of 22 inches to 28 inches and a 5 fish per angler bag limit. That's a substantial reduction from prior year's limits, which was a year-round open season with a 10 fish per angler bag limit and a 21-inch minimum size. Through the council process, and the federal government determined that is what was necessary to achieve a harvest reduction commensurate with the reduction in the sub ACL, and address the decline of the stock for the recreational fishery. Each of these limits is each of these species or stocks are managed by the federal government through the New England Fishery Management Council. So these decisions are first made at the federal level through the council process, and then with rules being adopted by NOAA Fisheries. The state then comes in and adopts complementary management measures for its recreational fisheries within state waters. The purpose of that is twofold. First, it allows vessels fishing lawfully in federal waters to land their fish in Massachusetts. Second, by having complementary rules in state waters, state anglers fishing in state waters can retain fish commensurate with the federal limits, and that ensures that we are not undermining the federal government's conservation goals for these stocks, and it enhances enforcement and compliance. Should we have different rules in the federal government, it makes enforcement far more complicated, given that there will be two sets of rules for two sets of anglers at the dock, depending on where one fishes. So that's true for all three stocks that we went over today. So we'll move to questions and comments from the public, and just so that you can have a view of what is in place that we're looking to finalize, as Taylor describes the limits that have been implemented by emergency regulation thus far, and that we are going to take comment on today. Dan, anything else?
No, Jared, well done. I guess, one of the take-home points is that the lateness of the federal process kind of puts us in a bind and having to do some of these things by emergency, but it's our attempt to be responsive to the management needs of the stocks, but also to create compatible rules whenever possible. So Jared, it's okay if you want to take any clarifying questions at this time.
Sure. Then you can unmute yourself and ask your question or provide your comment.
Good morning, everybody. I appreciate the time. I had sent a letter to Director McKierney about a week or two ago. I'm just a recreational fisherman. And in my letter, I had mentioned that I've been cod fishing for over 50 years, and there is no question in my mind that cod stocks have declined. My biggest issue and concern is I just struggle, and honestly, I've spoken to a person at NOAA. I think his name was John Steinbach or something, and then Mariah Kelly is supposed to call me today because I really question the validity of the recreational catch. And I'm specifically talking George's Bank here because I fished George's Bank for 30 years nearly. And basically 30 years ago, I would go on 3 head boats, the Helen H., the Yankee Fleet, and the Francis Fleet out of Rhode Island. And to this date, now, there is only one boat that travels to those waters. and it's the Helen H. And I've been doing that for about 5 or 6 years. And in those past 5 or 6 years, I have never caught 10 cod. Okay. And my issue is that boat, the Helen H. So right now, my comment is that out of those 3 boats, only one is sailing. And I know the federal regulation makes these rules, but right there, the cut is in 2/3. The boat takes 28 to 30 guys up, 30 people. We catch 10 fish, which we never do. I just find it hard to believe that 12 or 14 trips a year by the Helen H causes such a reduction in cod stock. And the other thing that I find kind of interesting was in speaking with Mr. Steinbeck from the NOAA, they include cod stock catch from Cox's Ledge in the east grounds of Block Island, which to me should not be inclusive of truly what's going on at George's. You know, it's a struggle for me to understand why recreational guys are getting punished. I mean, the trip on the Helen H cost $235. I went with 9 guys. 6 of us went up the night before. So it ends up costing us $400 at least to catch. My son and I took home 16 fish, 10 cod and 6 other fish. I mean, why do you want to just push us out? I don't think the cod stocks are that bad in George's that you need to limit us to 5 fish per day. It just logically to me doesn't make sense. And that's just my comment. And, you know, I've made a stronger comments to the NOA and NOAA, and I don't think anything is going to happen, but I just felt it important to hear my perspective on what's going on.
Thank you, Ben.
Jared, you have a second hand up. Joe Petner.
Yeah, Joe, you're recognized. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this morning. On to build on some of what Vin has said. I have a prepared PowerPoint. I'm going to send it to you because it provides some specific references to the NOAA improvement plan and some other data that I think, as Vin points out, belies the strict measures that you've enforced here. But I want to start by saying that I'm an old timer like Vin. I'm 77. I've been fishing since I was 5 years old. Started out in the Jersey Shore in the Delaware Bay and moved up to Massachusetts in 1974. Fished Quincy Bay when it was quite polluted, and I've certainly seen some dramatic improvement in the winter flounder, and I currently fish in Vineyard Sound and Buzzards Bay and occasionally Rhode Island Sound. But I also bring a perspective of having worked for the State Department of Education for the last 13 years with the so-called underperforming schools that are required under the accountability law to provide a sustainable improvement plan. And my job was to help the development of goals and measures in that plan and to monitor, progress monitor the improved outcomes for students. So I appreciate that in the marine fisheries management, not only is it impossible to make all people happy all the time, it's a sure bet that no one will be happy any of the time. So my point this morning is to provide some perspective as Vin has done. So I want to actually start on the big picture of things, which speaks to what systems and structures you have in place to get the results that you want, which is the increased biomass. Certainly, NOAA has recognized in its recreational information program, the implementation plan talks about the value added of 2 $24.7 billion in income and almost 500,000 jobs generated by saltwater recreational fishing. It's also interested, as I read through that report, in goal 4, which identified the importance of maintaining a strong science foundation for the program that includes robustness, integrity, transparency, and innovation. And in going to the database, the NOAA database, specifically the stock website, there is no data, current data that details the current improvement, which you started in 2014 around the biomass. And it leaves one to wonder, I think, as Vin has pointed out, about whether your measures are of any consequence. And if they are, what are they? That is, there's no data that we can go to confirm that what you're doing is actually working. So I think there is this point about what evidence do you have that the recreational fishing is contributing to the root cause of the decline in cod species? And how do you determine that? That is, you've got these slides, but there's no backup that helps us understand as recreational people how you came to this. I'll be honest, for me, I make a yearly trip through the canal out to Cape Cod Bay. So we call it our John Cabral Memorial trip. And back in 2013, we would consistently catch cod in that area of Stony Bank and off of Scituate. And there are still plenty of fish there. We go out now and have switched to haddock, but again, the data does not confirm what these regulations are providing for. In fact, I think one fish, to be honest, is somewhat of a cruel joke for those of us that have been around. And I'll point out to you a second example, which is your recent change in the black sea bass that gave us a season reduced from 5 fish to 4 fish and ended on September 4th, while at the same time you have increased the commercial interest to more days to fish and increased the tonnage. So again, it seems like at the very least, we're being relegated as the stepchild over the commercial interests. And if the sea bass biomass is of concern, why are we increasing the commercial? So there's some discrepancy in the regulations, and all of that serves to increase cynicism. You can hear that a bit in Vin's voice. I myself am more than willing, am truly worried about the future of recreational fishing for my grandchildren, and so I appreciate the need for some conservation here, but again, all of this should be driven by data. Again, in the big picture, I think the system factors that are contributing, you have you lack supervision technology, you lack monitoring personnel and vessels. I think there's a huge question about whether fishing gear is effective and environmentally sound. There's a presumption of overfishing. As Vin pointed out, I don't think that is the case in terms of recreational. We have a cultural fishing that is also part of how people think about this. There's no public involvement in policy, and we also have to consider the bycatch impact here. So
Joe, this is
Yeah.
Dan McKiernan. So between you and Vin, I mean, we're here today to take comments on whether or not the state should adopt complementary measures to the federal actions.
yeah,
And so, ultimately that's the discretion that we have. Do we go rogue, or do we adopt complementary measures? Because if we go rogue, then it creates a whole lot of chaos on the waterfront in terms of where somebody was fishing. And then if the National Marine Fisheries Service feels that our rules, if they're more liberal, if they're sort of putting the overall stock at risk, or creating an unenforceable situation, they could step in. And I do appreciate it. We don't get a lot of opportunities to hear the kind of comments that you've given today. So I really do appreciate hearing from you, since, we don't have as many in-person sessions as I'd like. But really the issue today is, are we going to adopt those complementary measures? And as far as, I will comment on a few of the things you mentioned, and you talk about, or you asked, is anything working that we're doing? And that's a really good point, because between the climate impacts or the natural variability and year class strengths, the system itself is a much bigger driver of abundance than the removals, especially with the low fishing mortality that we have now. And we see that in a lot of species, historically we all thought as fishery scientists that the number one driver to affecting stock size is the removals or the lack thereof. But now we've come to learn, especially in the state of the ecosystem now, is a lot of variability. And just look at haddock, how haddock surged back, even American lobster, with the same rates of removal, we had a big stock increase there. So we understand that. As far as the regulations, not always catching up with the stock, with the real stock size, I don't disagree with that. I mean, there tends to be a little bit of a lag with whether a stock is declining or a stock is recovering. It's sometimes our rules and the federal rules can be a year or two out of phase, and I know that's frustrating. Your comments about black sea bass, I totally get that. The perception of that is lousy, that the commercial fisheries are being liberalized and the rec fisheries being squeezed, but that goes to the root of a federal plan that apportions the harvest to the commercial and recreational in a formula. And I think we have staff on who can tell you what it is. Maybe it's like 60-40 or whatever the numbers is, close to that. But that's the hand that the recreational sector has been dealt. And so when the recreational sector grows, we can't allow it to just grow at the expense of the commercial sector. We have to constrain it, because under the Magnuson-Stevens Act, that's the law. That is when the council and NIMS makes those rules, those decisions about allocation, we all have to abide by those. And so it's been a terrible set of optics for us to say on an abundant black sea bass stock that, sorry, we have to take a fish away or shorten your season while we're liberalizing the commercial sector. But we literally have no choice aside from, not taking that commercial quota. And that makes little sense, because those commercial quotas are going to be taken by other states. So I understand your frustration. I really do. And I really thank you, both of you guys, for weighing in today. But as far as the essential question here, and we want to wrap this up in the next 5 or 6 minutes, about whether we should adopt complementary measures or not. I mean, that is the ultimate question.
Yeah.
So
And
we'd like to hear from you.
I have a proposal, an idea that is a variation of what you're talking about. But I do want to say this in terms of your point about going rogue. You know, I tell my superintendents, school principals, curriculum coordinators who are continuing to have the same underperformance, the same low achievements, the same dropout, poor graduation rates. If we continue to do what we've always done, we will continue to get what we've always got. So I think it's, you're in a leadership role, you have some authority. I think you should step up and challenge some of this. But what I want to propose here is the idea of not a daily quota, but a seasonal quota, for God. That is, let's say, okay, whatever the season, the dates that you define as a season. But for those of us who would be willing to participate, to create a recreational permit that says that I'm going to participate in this. And one of the responsibilities for doing that is that I have to report to you what my catch is. That is, it's a win-win. You get to collect some data that you wouldn't have otherwise, and I get to catch 5 fish on the day that I go out, or whatever. Or if Vin's going out 3 or 4 times. But I think that the idea of a seasonal catch limit is much more in line with the implementation goals that NOAA has. You could also, I'll probably regret that I said this, but you could also, for those of us that would be willing, create a charge, $50, for example, for that seasonal quota permit. And again, I think it would go along. I think it's a good faith effort that would go a long way towards restoring some trust and erasing some of the cynicism that we have around this what seems to be terribly unfair. And I don't begrudge the commercial guys. They're trying to make a living, and it's tough work. It's but it just seems so regressive, the system that we now operate under.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Joe. Okay.
Vin's got his hand back up. We got 3 minutes until the close. You want to take the comment down?
Go ahead. Yep.
All right. Vin, you recognize?
Yeah, thank you so much, Joe. I appreciate your comments also. I just from my understanding, if Massachusetts went rogue, what does that mean to anglers who would fish, say, out of Massachusetts and were fishing in Georges Bank, and we reverted back to the 10 fish? You could not do that?
Well, the limit for federal waters would remain. If you were fishing in federal waters, you'd be subject to the 5 fish limit.
Okay.
That would only apply in state waters. And if the federal government found that that was resulting in non-compliance or in whether intentional or unintentional, that undermined their conservation plan, they could step in and effectively regulate within state waters under the Magnuson Act. So
Yeah. And so could I actually suggest that Vin and Joe reach out to Kelly Whitmore of our staff who's on this call, and to see how you guys can get plugged into the New England Council's recreational advisory groups, where they, especially on groundfish, there are meetings with some of these issues are discussed. And I think if you had a more detailed view of the process and of how that works, maybe it'd be less cynicism. That no guarantee there, but You know, the real audience for your comments really should be the New England Council. And the way the council works is you do have subcommittees, and then you also have, you know, the full 17-person council. And then you've got, you know, council staff, and then finally the National Marine Fisheries Service who enacts those changes. So Jared, can we get Joe and Vin's contact information? And have Kelly reach out to them to describe the, like what opportunities they might have to comment to the council?
Sure. I can pull that from Zoom.
Okay. All right.
Right.
So Joe and Vin, that's what we're going to do. We're going to have Kelly reach out to you and find a way to get you plugged in.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, Jared, it's 8:30.
All right, we're gonna close this
Okay.
and switch over to the commission meeting. See everyone there.
And is that a different Zoom link?
Yeah, you should have it in your email
Okay.
from Zoom.
Thank you.
If you need it,
Thanks,
let me
Jared.
know.
Thank you, everyone.